Hello again. This is Oregon Moto John, just going to service the CVT portion of the RZR XP 1000. If you have a turbo, an RS1, an XP 1000, an XP 900, the same service tips would apply to those machines. Maybe once a year or so, I like to pull a cover and just inspect the belt, clean the sheaths, blow it out with air, just like Polaris recommends. You could do this more often. Some guys do this every third ride or so. That wouldn't be a wrong thing to do. It's pretty easy. But I find once a year to be sufficient. But again, if you're riding hard in mud, things are getting dirty, really dusty, I would definitely recommend it more often. So first step is we're just going to loosen up this connector here. It just uses a regular flathead screwdriver, or you could use the appropriate size for the screw there. And then these are 8mm. We're going to take off all those screws around the case, and then we'll just pull the cover off. In this case, I have a Razorback temperature gauge. They make it real simple. I don't need to remove from the case down here. They supply a quick disconnect, so I'll just unscrew that. So we're going to loosen this up. Loosen this, it just unscrews, and unplug that, and take off all these bolts all the way around the cover, and then we'll pull off the cover. For pulling off the cover, this SLP, and it's got a spring kind of shaft to it. It has an 8mm. This reversible for 10mm. Some covers are 10. It just works great. You can take this and just unscrew this. You can also use a hand tool with 8mm on it. I don't know. Sometimes I'll use this. I mean, that's all it is. That quick. Threads on this case are kind of coarse threads screwing into plastic, but on a turbo it'll be screwing into an aluminum cover. I always like that aluminum cover. Thought that was a nice touch. So either case, don't over tighten them. In the case of the aluminum cover, when you put everything back together, do it by start those by hand. So don't run them in with this kind of a thing. You'll just strip them. You could strip them. So and I wouldn't even run these back in with this, because I could strip out my plastic, then I'll be replacing the cover behind it. So but removing them, you can use whatever you want. This spring shaft screwdriver device is nice because, I can bend around the shock in this case. You don't need to remove the shock to get this off. So really, many times hand tools work great. I'm using this Grypmat to put parts in. I love this thing. It's silicone. You can wash it. You can put your screws in it. And then here's just a visualization of that SLP. Basically, it's a screwdriver with a flexible spring shaft to it. Got the screws out. I'm loosening up this clamp. Just loosen it. Of course, you don't need to unscrew it all the way. Now that I've pulled this hose off, now it's just a matter of taking this off. And it's easier if you take this off before the screws, because sometimes this can be hard to pull off. But it's not a big deal if you do it in a different order. You just put a hand on here and one on this hose and pull it off. So now we're going to just take this cover off. Put a hose around the cover there. I have the cover pulled up and out of the way here, so I don't need to rotate that out. I don't need to take this all the way off, but if I did, in this case, I'm just having a little trouble getting this rotate out of the way. It's the first time I've done this machine. So that being said, I think if I jacked it up in the back, I could drop down this back end and then rotate it around the primary, but it's just hanging up on the primary. But I have it up and off of it, so I can rotate everything freely. And the key in this video is I could change the belt in this scenario. I can rotate this freely. I have the machine in neutral, and I can inspect the belt, and the belt looks fine. I'm looking for cracks or areas, flat spots. And what we're going to do next is we're going to blow this out with compressed air, wipe out the inside of the cover, blow it out first. You can use CIM, using HunterWorks secondary rollers on here instead of the plastic pucks, and that way it doesn't wear out the aluminum. That's a real easy upgrade. You just drive this pin out and put the pucks in from HunterWorks. So that being said, let's blow these out. Then we'll wipe the sheaves down with a little rubbing alcohol and maybe a little Scotch-Brite pad. These actually look really good. But we'll clean things up a little bit. So I have this hooked up, this nozzle hooked up to an air compressor. So we're just gonna kind of lightly blow all this out. Also, just take a moment and wipe out the inside of the cover with a rag of your choice, and maybe a little bit of furniture polish to catch the dust debris. When you're blowing out these clutches, make sure to get inside the primary clutches. There's a lot of moving parts in here, so you want to get that all blown out really good. Clutches like to be clean. They're not lubricated. And as you can see, there's lots of sliding parts in here, so you want that clean. So definitely take your time. Sometimes people run without covers, and that's fine, that can work, but I prefer to keep all these little you know, sliding pieces clean. There's lots of things in here that like to be clean and not be covered in grit and grime, so you want this stuff clean. That's really the name of the game. You could take this belt off too and wash it, but it isn't necessary. I went ahead and I turned this. This will easily turn so I could put the other surface up, and then I blew this out from this side. You can externally wipe this off too. Just don't use anything slippery. No furniture polish on the clutches. They want to be clean. Maybe rubbing alcohol, electrical cleaner only. I also rotated this primary, so I rotated the other side up so I could blow it out too. And you can lightly wipe it off as well. Now that the primary and secondary clutches are just lightly wiped off and especially blown out, now it's just a matter of taking these sheaths. The sheaths used to confuse me. People talk about the sheaths. I was like, what are they talking about? Well, they're talking about the two sides of the pulley. So this inner surface here would be a sheath, and this other surface would be a sheath. Sometimes there can be belt transfer onto those, and they'll get black looking, and that'll make it, you'd think rubber on rubber would make a better gripping surface, but it actually isn't. So we're going to take a Scotch-Brite pad and a little bit of rubbing alcohol and run perpendicular to the sheath, so up and down, generally not parallel with the way the belt's going, but if you did, it wouldn't hurt anything, I don't think. And just lightly, this is aluminum. We're not trying to remove aluminum. We're just trying to make sure there isn't any belt transfer. And we'll do that for the primary up here, and we'll do it for the secondary clutch back here. So here's the Scotch-Brite pad you want to use. It's just a regular Scotch-Brite pad. I got a pack of them from online. I think I've had them at Costco before, but anyway, you can just use one like this. You can even cut that up. Actually, I usually cut it to where it's even smaller, and then I can just get in here and then just lightly abrade that surface. Notice I'm going up and down, not parallel with the way the belt's running, up and down. And this isn't going to need much because, as you can see, they're already pretty clean, but I'll go ahead and do that very lightly to both surfaces, both sides of the sheaths on the primary and the secondary. To open up the secondary clutch a little bit, I use the clutch tool here. I just kind of put this in here, then you pry down, bottom that out. Now this sheath is opened is as wide as it's going to get. If you have a turbo, you'll have a little screw here. You turn that little L-shaped thing with the threads on it in, and that'll open your sheaths. You can just leave that in, and that'll help you get at your sheaths while you're cleaning those. Once it's open, you can generally remove the tool and it'll stay open. Maybe this shows what I'm trying to do a little better. So you're just kind of lightly going up and down, move to the next surface, to the next surface, then up here, lightly up and down until it's just nice and shiny. And that's really enough for that. Now I'm going to rotate this, and I'll do the same thing to this inner surface here and the other surface here. We'll do that on both pulleys. Now I have a spray bottle with some rubbing alcohol in it, and I just spray it on the shop towel, and then I'll go in here and then I'll just wipe this off. Wipe that off, you know, with some rubbing alcohol. One time I thought I was being really smart, and I sprayed this entire mechanism with brake cleaner. The only thing I didn't think about was there's a roller in here that spins freely, that when you're not driving, the belt drops down on that and spins, and there's needle bearings in there. And so I effectively washed some of the grease out of my needle bearing and in my primary drive needle bearings. And so then it was hard to shift because this wouldn't quit spinning like it was supposed to, because the needle bearings were not spinning freely. So I learned a lesson. I never did that again. But you can spray it on a rag, and you can wipe around any of these parts with rubbing alcohol on it or electrical cleaner, and you won't hurt anything. But you don't want to spray on the side of the sheath and then have it run down into the needle bearings under the roller of that clutch. So learn from my mistake. And you can wipe down anything external with rubbing alcohol inside of this cover. Just get it nice and clean, because you're going to button it all up. So here I am taking rubbing alcohol to the inside of both of these sheaths just on a rag, and you can turn, and once you have it lightly scuffed with some Scotch-Brite pad, you can wipe those out. And you could remove the belt and wash it with some Dawn dish soap if you wanted to, but in this case it looks fine. I'm just going to leave it. It'd be real easy to take the belt off at this point. If your belt is if you're in doubt at all, just change it. So much easier to do it now than on the dunes or on a trail. And so if you see anything, any cracks, any flat spots, any glazing, just take it off and replace it in the comfort of your garage, and then use it as a spare. Put it on your machine or at your trailer, and you always want to have a belt on your machine, of course, and the tools to change it. But yeah, just get this all wiped off and looking good. Of course, we'll do the same for the primary. You have the compression on the primary, so it's a little harder to turn it, but I can get it. I displaced this cover down a little further so I can get at that primary a little easier now. Okay, this is ready to put the cover back on and button it back up. Everything's clean. The belt looks good. Before you button it up, take this and turn it. If you used the tool to spread it, because that just seats the belt back on, and see it expands that back out. Now this belt's dropped back in the sheaves. It's not spread apart, so it just takes 3 or 4 revolutions there at most, and it'll be good to go. And so let's put the cover on. Wipe on down inside of your cover. And clutches like to be clean. If you keep them clean, they won't let you down. Keeping them clean and belt temps down is what makes these things last. After many razors and many broken belts, that's what works. Just a special tip, see this seal in here? You want to make sure that doesn't fall out before you put it back together. If it does fall out, this time it didn't, then many times I'll just take a dab of silicone on the inside every so often and make sure that that's glued into place. But in this case, my seal stayed in place, and so we can just put the cover on and button it up. I'll go ahead and lightly run all these screws in by hand. Remember, if you have a turbo with an aluminum backing cover there for the CVT housing, start those by hand. You don't want to strip those out. And likewise with all these, you're just going to go lightly hand tight. You're not going to put a lot of force, because you don't want to strip those out. You hate to do preventative maintenance and then create a problem of stripping screw holes out. So just lightly snug all of them down, or just put them in, I should say, and then I go around and then just lightly snug them all down. And then we'll put our hose back on, and I plugged this back in, screwed it in, and that's it. CVT maintenance is easy to do. I would encourage you to at least annually inspect it, if not more, and keep things clean in there, and I think you'll find your razor treats you right. Here's a quick little tip. If you ever get tired of fighting getting the intake CVT hose on, just spray some rubbing alcohol around it. Makes it slippery and it'll evaporate. Then this thing will just slide on pretty easily. With a little rubbing alcohol on there it goes, slides right on. So to maintain your CVT on an XP1000s, it's pretty easy. All I needed in this case was a little time, some shop towels, rubbing alcohol, some basic hand tools, flathead screwdriver, 8mm socket, and the sheave spreader for the secondary that comes with the machine, and just a little time. And like I said, I would rather do this kind of stuff in my shop, in the comfort of my shop, on a rainy day or a cold day when I'm not riding, rather than in the summer when I want to ride and things start breaking. So do it on your terms, I guess is what I'm saying. Don't do it on the machine's terms because you didn't maintain it. Do it on your terms. Maintaining your CVT is super important. I find that these are actually fairly maintenance free if you just keep them clean and cool. Since we're talking about CVTs, this is like my 5th razor, and it took me a while to figure out what worked, and I've had really good luck with this blowhole back in there. You can see it's plugged in, and it just plugs into the taillight harness back in there, so it's really easy to get power to, and it just keys off the ignition off the taillights. I like those. I also am a big believer in the Razorback temp gauge. I know it's hard to see it there, but it mounts really nicely on the XP, just right here. It looks like it is supposed to be there. And then you can run the wiring up under the dash here, and then there's a little spot cut out where the wires feed up under there. And then I just fish them, instead of through the housing and the tunnel where the drive shaft is, I just run along the top of this frame here and all the way back on top of the skid plate on top of the frame. And then you can come out here, kind of down in there, and then I run it up here along the wiring harness, up the top of the machine, back here, and then you can see where it screws in. There's a quick disconnect, and then it just mounts right there at the back of that housing. So really easy to put in. Some mount a little differently depending on what model you have. A turbo sometimes has a little different, slightly different location, but you just want to be able to see the belt. So between having feedback as to what my belt temp's doing and keeping everything clean, I've had very little trouble, like no trouble with my belts. Haven't had to change a belt other than in my garage for a very long time. Another thing that it's helpful is, see this little pedal down here? That gas pedal? You can tell I'm being kind of silly, but yeah, that's important. Driving in a way that can help your belt help itself is a good thing too. So I found this Razorback temp gauge helps me monitor what my inputs with my right foot are doing, so that I'm driving in a way that doesn't overheat my belt. So just some I guess final thoughts. When I first got a Razor, people talked about driving a Razor can be an important, how you drive it is important for CVT life, and they weren't kidding. So just some final thoughts and tips. Hello again. This is Oregon Moto John, just going to service the CVT portion of the Razor XP 1000. If you have a turbo, an RS1, an XP 1000, an XP 900, the same service tips would apply to those machines. Maybe once a year or so, I like to pull the cover and just inspect the belt, clean the sheaths, blow it out with air, just like Polaris recommends. You could do this more often. Some guys do this every third ride or so. That wouldn't be a wrong thing to do. It's pretty easy. But I find once a year to be sufficient. But again, if you're riding hard and mud, things are getting dirty, really dusty, I would definitely recommend it more often. So first step is we're just going to loosen up this connector here. It just uses a regular flathead screwdriver, or you could use the appropriate size for the screw there. And then these are 8 millimeters. We're going to take off all those screws around the case, and then we'll just pull the cover off. In this case, I have a Razorback temperature gauge. They make it real simple. I don't need to remove from the case down here. They supply a quick disconnect, so I'll just unscrew that. So we're going to loosen this up. Loosen this, it just unscrews, and unplug that, and take off all these bolts all the way around the cover, and then we'll pull off the cover.